A pot of tea had only just begun to steam when I heard familiar laughter drifting in from the street. It seemed some wandering souls remembered the way back before the tea had a chance to grow lonely. Come then, warm your hands, trade a few jianghu rumors, and let us see what fresh twists destiny has tucked inside today's tale. An old traveler's journal records that after surviving storms fierce enough to shake sects and cities alike, Chen Ping'an finally reached a crossroads where every choice carried the weight of another's future. While treasures, hidden schemes, and unexpected allies quietly gathered around him, his greatest lesson remained, teaching a stubborn little girl that true strength is forged one patient step at a time. And beyond the next ferry, Azure Phoenix Nation awaits, where bustling markets, concealed fortunes, and dangerous encounters are already watching for his arrival. By the time Pei Qian and the others returned to Dust Medicinal Shop, the night had already deepened, and the alleys of Old Dragon City lay beneath a veil of silence. Chen Ping'an had remained at the entrance the entire time. The moment he saw them, he called Sui Yubian aside, saying that there was an important matter they needed to discuss. The two walked slowly down the narrow alley. Beneath the dim night sky, Chen Ping'an revealed the old man's intention. He wished to take Sui Yubian into his sect and guide her onto the path of sword cultivation.
Do you know anything about him? His name, his cultivation base, or even what kind of sect he belongs to?
I will ask those questions only if you decide that you are willing to accept his proposal. I will also send a flying sword letter to Peace and Tranquility Mountain and ask the old heavenly Lord to verify everything he tells us. Only after I am certain that there is nothing suspicious will I allow you to leave with him. Sui Yubian offered no reply. Her silence stretched from one end of the alley to the other, forcing Chen Ping'an to continue walking beside her until they emerged onto a broad street that had lost nearly all of its daytime splendor. She had already died 3 times, twice in the battle at the rundown temple and once more outside Old Dragon City. Each return had carried a price, and those accumulated deaths had sealed her martial arts ceiling at the 8th tier. For a martial artist as proud as Sui Yubian, this was not merely a limit in cultivation. It was a cage built from her own deaths, one that talent and determination alone could no longer break. Sword cultivation now represented more than a new path. It was perhaps her only path forward. Sui Yubian suddenly stopped, her gaze sharpened as she turned toward Chen Ping'an.
You must really want me to go with him, don't you? You could receive 1 or 2 treasures as compensation, and the old man would owe you a favor as well. Isn't that the truth?
Chen Ping'an shook his head without hesitation. Unless I truly had no other choice, I would rather have you remain beside me. Ideally, I would help you scatter your true chi safely and then guide you into becoming a swordsman, allowing you to surpass the ceiling imposed on you as a martial artist. But I am only a 5th-tier martial artist, and I have barely begun rebuilding my bridge of immortality. Compared with the great immortal sects of the world, what resources do I possess? What guidance can I offer you? If you stay with me, I may only delay your progress. Time is precious on the cultivation path. Sometimes, even a small delay can become a calamity that can never be undone. Chen Ping'an's choice revealed the difference between possession and responsibility. Keeping a powerful companion beside him would clearly benefit him. Yet he valued Sui Yubian's future more than his immediate strength. In the ruthless cultivation world, voluntarily surrendering an advantage was often more difficult than winning one.
If I leave, what will you do with my picture scroll?
I will keep it safe. There is no one in this world whom I can trust wholeheartedly except myself. At the very least, I know that I will never use the picture scroll to hurt you or extort anything from you. Whether you believe me is your decision, but only while the scroll remains in my possession can I be certain that no one will use it for evil. Even if the old man sincerely wishes to accept you as his direct disciple, how could I know that everyone around him will treat you with the same sincerity? What if someone takes the scroll and uses it to force you into doing something against your will? Those who stand in high places are sometimes trapped by their own circumstances. They may be forced into decisions they would rather avoid, but I am not standing in such a place. I am not claiming that I am kinder than him, nor that I will necessarily treat you better. I can promise only one thing. I will never regard you as an object to be sold to the highest bidder. Su Yubian stared at him with unwavering intensity. Chen Ping'an met her gaze calmly, without avoidance or unease. Everything I have said comes from the bottom of my heart. The picture scroll was both Sui Yubian's anchor to life and the chain that could enslave her. Chen Ping'an understood that entrusting it to a powerful sect might appear safe, yet power itself was no guarantee of mercy. His argument was not built on blind confidence in others, but on certainty regarding the limits he would never cross. Su Yubian still did not give him an answer. Instead, she abruptly shifted to a subject that seemed entirely unrelated.
That woman from Peace and Tranquility Mountain is very beautiful. She is also a nascent tier swordsman.
So?
Are you not attracted to her in the slightest?
Chen Ping'an rolled his eyes, interlaced his fingers behind his head, and answered with complete casualness. There are countless beautiful women beneath the heavens. When I encounter one, I may take an extra glance or two. Beautiful sights are pleasing to the eyes, after all, but why would that mean I must become attracted to them? For once, the usually cold and restrained Sui Yubian burst into open laughter.
You are a man, aren't you? How can you feel no lust when looking at a beautiful woman? Could there be something wrong with you?
I am happy to talk, but there is no need to insult me. Her laughter did not answer the old man's proposal, yet it revealed that Chen Ping'an's sincerity had eased the tension in her heart. Sometimes, a decision affecting an entire cultivation path could not be made immediately. A moment of laughter was all the breathing room she could permit herself. The two returned to Dust Medicinal Shop without speaking further. Pei Chan, still wide awake, stood at the entrance with her bamboo hiking pole in hand, eagerly waiting to display the results of her training.
I want to show you my sword and saber techniques. After Wei Xian and Lu Baixiang saw them, they were completely entranced.
The four picture scroll martial artists all knew that Huang Ting had taught Pei Qian the white ape saber-wielding technique and the white ape sword-carrying technique. Yet they pretended to know nothing and never attempted to coax the methods from her. Part of their restraint came from martial honor. The rest came from their understanding of Pei Qian. She would solemnly promise to keep their request secret, then immediately run to Chen Ping'an and report everything. They also understood Chen Ping'an's temperament. He could tolerate competition, ambition, and even cunning, but exploiting a child to steal another person's inheritance would cross a boundary. None of the four wished to test how firmly he guarded that boundary. Sui Yubian quietly withdrew into the backyard, unwilling to watch the demonstration. Chen Ping'an then turned toward Pei Qian with an encouraging smile. Show me what you've got. Pei Qian nodded with an expression of supreme seriousness. She released a delicate battle cry, stepped forward, and swept the hiking pole through the air with the opening movements of the white ape saber-wielding technique. Yet enthusiasm overwhelmed control. The bamboo pole tore free from her hands and shot directly toward the alley wall. Chen Ping'an reacted in an instant, catching it just before impact. Had he been even a fraction slower, the bamboo hiking pole would have shattered against the stone. Pei Qian froze in horror. Certain that another knock to the head was coming, she braced herself for punishment. Instead, Chen Ping'an returned the pole with a smile. Your spirit is correct. From now on, however, you must practice your six-step walking meditation diligently. Even the finest sword and saber techniques are useless without a body capable of performing them. Without a proper foundation, displaying such techniques will only make you look foolish. The lesson was simple but fundamental. Techniques determine what a cultivator can attempt, while the foundation determines what they can actually accomplish. Pei-chan had inherited excellent forms, yet without balance, strength, and control, those forms were little more than empty gestures. Pei-chan stomped her foot in frustration. Had she known her grand performance would end with more walking meditation, she would never have tried to show off. To her, those 6 steps were a far greater torment than any saber technique. You need to endure more hardship while you are still young. He gently patted her on the head. Pei-chan immediately looked up, hope shining in her eyes.
Does that mean I can enjoy myself every day after I grow up? Will I no longer have to make transcriptions? Can I drink wine whenever I want and eat anything I like?
You will know the answers when you are grown. Chen Ping'an led her into the shop and closed the doors behind them. Pei-chan lowered her head, and a troubled sigh escaped her lips.
I don't really want to grow up. That woman said I am not very pretty, so I probably won't become pretty when I am older either. At my age, even if I am ugly, people will still call me cute, but if I become an ugly woman, no one will call me cute anymore. While we were looking at the lanterns, Julian said that in a few years, I would be able to ward off evil spirits even better than a door god. I was very happy at first, but something about it felt wrong. I asked Old Man Wei, and he tried to fool me. He said Julian meant that once I became an unmatched swordsman, my sword chi would become so powerful that every evil spirit would fear me. But Big Sister Sui told me the truth. Julian meant that I would become so hideous that even ghosts would flee from me. How could he be so heartless? Whenever he cooks, I always eat an extra half bowl of rice, and I praise his food more than anyone else. How could he say such a thing about me?
Amusement flickered in Chen Ping'an's eyes. Copying her wounded posture and miserable tone, he released a heavy sigh of his own. How vexing. Pei-chan immediately understood that he was teasing her. Her gloom vanished, and a wide smile broke across her face. This small exchange carried the warmth of a family formed not by blood, but by shared roads and hardships. Chen Ping'an did not dismiss Pei-chan's childish worries. He simply stepped into her mood and helped her laugh her way out of it. After returning to her room, Pei-chan sat across from Sui Yubian, who was practicing standing meditation. Resting her chin in both hands, the girl stared at her with complete concentration.
Big Sister Sui, how did you become so beautiful? Can you teach me?
Sui Yubian opened her eyes. She appeared to be in a rare good mood, but she suppressed her amusement and answered with grave seriousness.
You must approach everything with sincerity and diligence. That includes reading, making transcriptions, walking meditation, standing meditation, practicing sword and saber techniques, and even ordinary chores that seem insignificant.
Pei-chan turned her head aside and scoffed.
That is clearly not true, Big Sister Sui.
Sui Yubian nodded. Then, imitating Huang Ting's manner, she released a theatrical sigh.
You are such a clever girl. What a pity that looking at you is so depressing.
Pei-chan turned away in outrage and collapsed against the edge of the table. She then took out her treasured yellow paper talisman and carefully pasted it onto her forehead.
Big Sister Sui, do you like my father?
The question struck without warning. Sui Yubian was left completely speechless. Pei-chan did not seem particularly interested in receiving an answer. Before long, Sui Yubian closed her eyes again and resumed her standing meditation, widening her meridians while nourishing her physical constitution. Pei-chan adjusted the yellow talisman on her forehead with great care, then whispered a solemn prayer.
Talisman, please protect me and keep every ghost and evil spirit away.
That same night, The Zhao clan Yin soul appeared before Chen Ping'an. It had come bearing a message from the scholarly sage. Parasol Leaf Sect had finally delivered its official compensation. The golden core of the 12th tier Great Demon had already been refined by Du Mao inside Parasol Leaf Small World during his desperate attempt to ascend. In exchange for what had been lost, the sect offered 2 5-colored Tao manifestation fragments, one roughly the size of a finger, the other as large as a fist. When a 12th tier cultivator died, there was a possibility that immortal remains would be left behind. Those who failed their ascension could instead leave Tao manifestation fragments, crystalline remnants resembling pieces of 5-colored glass. Such fragments were not ordinary treasures. They were condensed traces of an ascension tier cultivator's path, carrying value that could stir the greed of even upper 5-tier experts. A fist-sized fragment was therefore not merely compensation. It was wealth capable of drawing calamity from across mountains and continents. Du Mao had disregarded the lives of his own disciples and had even destroyed Parasol Leaf's small world for the sake of his ascension. Rage toward him had spread throughout the sect. His sole act of redemption came in the final moments of his life. Of the 4 5-colored fragments formed from his upper body, he ensured that 3 fell back onto Parasol Leaf Sect's ancestral mountain. The sect retained only 1. The remaining 2 were handed over to Chen Ping'an. After explaining the compensation, the Zhao clan Yin soul carefully produced a palm-sized parasol leaf. It was a minimization treasure supplied by Parasol Leaf Sect, and the 2 Tao manifestation fragments were sealed within its hidden space. The scholarly sage had also prepared 2 mountain protection formations for Chen Ping'an. One replicated the formidable sword formation of Peace and Tranquility Mountain, while the other copied the mountain protection formation of Planchette Writing Sect. Parasol Leaf Sect had been forced to cover the cost of hiring powerful Mohist cultivators to establish both formations. The required grain rain coins, a considerable fortune, had also been stored inside the parasol leaf. However, Chen Ping'an would still need to acquire suitable treasures to serve as the cores of the formations. Whether he purchased them or encountered them through future fated opportunities would depend entirely on him. The formations promised immense defensive power, but without appropriate cores, they remained magnificent frameworks lacking a heart. This ensured that Chen Ping'an received protection without being handed effortless strength. He would still have to build the foundation of his future mountain through his own journeys and fortune. The Yin soul then delivered the scholarly sage's final warning.
The scholarly sage advises you to keep this parasol leaf on your person at all times. However, you should avoid opening it before returning to your hometown. The moment a minimization treasure is opened, it is equivalent to briefly opening a small world. The aura of everything stored inside will be exposed. Ascension Tier Tao manifestation fragments are exceedingly rare. Every cultivator of the upper 5 tiers would desire them, so their presence must remain concealed. He also asks me to advise you to elevate your golden sweet wine robe into a pseudo-celestial tool. His exact words were that you would not regret doing so.
Chen Ping'an stored the parasol leaf safely. Having completed its duty, the Zhao clan Yin soul slowly faded into nothingness. The Yin soul itself had gained tremendous benefits merely by carrying the scholarly sage's 2 messages. Chen Ping'an lay back down on his makeshift bed inside the shop. His fingers brushed the white hairpin in his hair for a brief moment before he closed his eyes and surrendered to sleep. At the first light of morning, Fan Junmao arrived at Dust Medicinal Shop and brought Chen Ping'an to the sea of clouds above Old Dragon City. The old man was already waiting outside the shop. Before he could speak to Chen Ping'an, Sui Yubian stepped out and initiated a private conversation with him. When their discussion ended, Sui Yubian returned to the backyard. The old man remained outside with unmistakable satisfaction written across his face. The result was not everything he had hoped for, but it was very close. He merely needed to wait several years. After that, Jade Tablet Sect would possess an extraordinary prodigy with the potential to become a nascent-tier swordsman within a century. Once Sui Yubian reached the nascent tier, the old man intended to personally escort her to Parasol Leaf Sect and ask whether its members could make a suitable contribution toward rebuilding their ancestral hall. The old man's satisfaction showed just how highly he valued Sui Yubian. Yet his thoughts of visiting Parasol Leaf Sect also carried the edge of future reckoning. A nascent-tier swordsman was not merely a disciple. She could become a blade through which Jade Tablet Sect reclaimed dignity and debts alike. The sun climbed above the eastern horizon, pouring resplendent light across the boundless sea of clouds. At that height, heaven and earth seemed to move together, ready to lend their strength when the proper moment arrived. Chen Ping'an's refinement of the water seal proceeded with astonishing smoothness. For 10 full days, the process unfolded without a single serious obstruction. When the refinement was finally completed, a painting of a flowing white river appeared upon the inner wall of his core abode. At that same instant, his golden sweet wine robe suddenly felt far lighter, as though an invisible burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Encouraged by this newfound freedom, Chen Ping'an allowed the abundant spiritual energy within the sea of clouds to pour freely into his acupoints. The spiritual energy gathered inside the lake residing in one of his acupoints. As the streams entered the water, an ethereal cloud gradually took shape above its surface. With only a slight effort, Chen Ping'an kept his true chi from clashing with the lake or the spiritual energy flowing into it. The forces within his body resembled officials sharing an imperial court. They were not necessarily trusted allies, yet neither were they mortal enemies. For the moment, each remained within its proper place, coexisting in relative harmony. This balance was a crucial victory. Chen Ping'an was rebuilding his bridge of immortality while preserving the foundation of a martial artist. If true chi and spiritual energy had rejected one another, every future breakthrough could have become a battle inside his own body. Their peaceful coexistence opened the possibility of walking two paths without immediately destroying either one. Late on the 10th night, Chen Ping'an returned to Dust Medicinal Shop with Fan Junmao. The 4-picture scroll martial artists sensed him and briefly opened their eyes, then closed them again. The Zhao clan Yin Soul transformed into black smoke and slipped into a nearby wall, while Zheng Dafeng and Pei Chen remained sound asleep. Chen Ping'an sat on the bench and took a small sip of his basic refinement medicinal wine. Fan Junmao stood beside him, her expression burdened by thoughts she had clearly carried for a long time.
If you were in my position, would you exchange this sea of clouds that has accompanied you for countless years for the position of southern mountain god of eastern treasured vile continent?
I don't know. Fan Junmao was already in a terrible mood. His honest but utterly unhelpful answer immediately ignited her temper.
Then what exactly do you know?
I know that there are many things I don't know. His answer sounded almost infuriatingly simple, yet it reflected Chen Ping'an's deepest strength. He did not pretend to understand choices whose burdens he had never carried. In a world where powerful cultivators often treated certainty as authority, acknowledging ignorance was its own form of honesty. With a displeased expression, Fan Junmao tossed him a sword she had prepared inside her minimization treasure. Before Chen Ping'an could say more, she vanished from the shop. The next morning, Chen Ping'an, Pei Qian, and the 4-picture scroll martial artists departed from Dust Medicinal Shop. Their destination was the Immortal ferry station on the western side of Old Dragon City. From there, they would board a ship bound for Azure Phoenix Nation in the northeastern region of Eastern Treasured Vial Continent. Fan accompanied the group to the ferry station. Before they separated, he made Chen Ping'an promise that he would not forget the porcelain he had agreed to craft for him when they next met.
You must remember my porcelain the next time we meet.
Back at the medicinal shop, Zheng Dafeng remained alone. He studied the fortune character hanging on the wall and eventually concluded that it was indeed far better looking than the spring character. He slowly circled the table in the hall. During the previous days, Julian's cooking had repeatedly filled that table with warmth, fragrance, and noise. Now its empty surface made the silence of the shop seem even deeper. Zheng Dafeng then sat on the doorstep and looked toward the bench beneath the skywell. Chen Ping'an had often sat there during his stay. Pei Qian had occupied it several times as well. Without anyone formally declaring it, that small corner had gradually become Chen Ping'an's territory. Only after the travelers had gone did the traces they left behind become visible. The table, the bench, and the characters on the wall were ordinary objects, yet together they preserved the warmth of a temporary home. Their absence transformed those same objects into reminders of parting. Zheng Dafeng lit his pipe and scratched his head, already imagining the fierce scolding awaiting him from Old Man Yang when he eventually returned to Dragon Spring Prefecture. Far away, aboard the departing ship, Chen Ping'an once again carried a sword upon his back. Its name was simple, arrogant, and impossible to ignore. Sword Immortal. The Lushuan bound for Azure Phoenix Nation was the work of a Mohis shipbuilding master. Yet among the countless flying vessels that crowded the skies of Old Dragon City, it was far from extraordinary. Its hull could carry fewer than 200 passengers, making it seem almost modest beside the colossal intercontinental ships that crossed mountains and seas. Its true purpose was commerce. It ferried valuable goods between the northern reaches of Eastern Treasured Vial Continent and the southern territories of Parasol Leaf Continent. Unfortunately, the merchant who owned it could only purchase what remained after the 5 great clans of Old Dragon City had taken the finest merchandise. Most of the cargo was ordinary. Once in a rare while, however, a treasure overlooked by the great clans would slip into the merchant's hands. If such a hidden gem earned several hundred additional snowflake coins, the entire crew would celebrate as though fortune itself had boarded the ship. Azure Phoenix Nation was renowned throughout the southeastern region of Eastern Treasured Vial Continent. Taoist temples stood beneath ancient pines, Buddhist monasteries rested among misty mountains, and immortals and eminent monks frequently presided over grand liberation rites of water and land or heavenly worship ceremonies funded by the imperial court. The nation's blue sandalwood Xuan paper was equally famous. Scholars, calligraphers, and nobles from several continents sought it at extravagant prices, filling the imperial treasury and making the emperor of Azure Phoenix Nation one of the wealthiest rulers in the entire southeastern region. Buddhism had never flourished across Eastern Treasureable Continent, yet Azure Phoenix Nation was the great exception. Its monasteries were more numerous than those of any other nation, and their walls were covered in celebrated verses left behind by revered scholars and poets. Countless learned men traveled great distances merely to stand before those words. High on the Lushuan's top floor, a brightly illuminated room remained warm against the vast sea of clouds. Chen Ping'an sat beside a table, quietly reading a book detailing the mountains, rivers, roads, and cities of Azure Phoenix Nation. Zhu Lian had purchased it from a bookshop before their departure from Old Dragon City. Across from him, Pei Qian bent over a sheet of paper and carefully made her daily transcriptions. The brush moved slowly in her small hand, each character demanding patience that the once restless girl had never possessed. The beginning of any discipline is the cruelest stage. Before habit is forged, every repetition feels like a chain. Once habit takes root, however, the same chain can become a path. Pei Chen had finally reached that threshold. She no longer needed Chen Ping'an to remind her to transcribe each day. Even so, Chen Ping'an understood her too well. If he were no longer beside her, she would abandon the practice almost immediately. She might feel guilty for 1 or 2 days, but the guilt would soon fade, and the unfinished pages would be forgotten. Chen Ping'an had divided the basic refinement medicinal wine in his gourd into 5 portions. 4 portions had gone to the 4 martial artists who had emerged from the picture scrolls, for such medicinal wine was one of the rare external resources capable of strengthening the cultivation foundation of a pure martial artist. Sui Yubian had already entered the Vajrabadi tier. With the sword deep infatuation in her hand, her lethality rose far beyond the ordinary limits of her realm. In a one-on-one confrontation, any chi refiner below the earth immortal realms would be courting death by allowing Sui Yubian within 100 feet. Her strength was not merely cultivation. It was cultivation sharpened by sword intent, combat experience, and the ruthless decisiveness of someone who understood exactly how to end a battle. Zhu Lian's bottleneck was also beginning to loosen. The signs were unmistakable. If fortune and understanding aligned, he would soon follow Sui Yubian into the 3 mind tempering tiers. Wei Shan and Lu Baishan remained farther from their next breakthroughs, yet their spars with Zheng Dafeng, together with the deaths they had suffered during the battle outside Old Dragon City, had forced their martial foundations another step forward. For the 4 picture scroll martial artists, death was not merely an ending. Each brutal defeat exposed weakness, shattered complacency, and left behind experience that ordinary 6th and 7th tier martial artists might never obtain in an entire lifetime. That was why their realms alone could never fully measure their danger. Chen Ping'an had quietly assessed the strength of his entire group. Unless they crossed paths with some deranged cultivator of the upper 5 tiers, he believed they could survive almost any ordeal awaiting them on the road. Even against a nascent tier Earth Immortal, they would not necessarily be helpless. As long as the opponent was not a swordsman, the group could still fight with everything they had. If Sui Yubian, Zhu Lian, Wei Shan, and Lu Baishan were willing to sacrifice their lives, Chen Ping'an might even seize victory. Yet that calculation revealed the terrifying difference between surviving a battle and winning one. Victory purchased with 4 loyal lives would carry a cost heavier than defeat. There was only one great regret in his present arsenal. The Azure sword-suppressing talisman, written by Zhang Kuai with the wind and snow awe, had already been given to Zheng Dafeng for the battle upon the dragon-scaling platform. The sword sealed by that talisman had been none other than Sword Immortal, the blade Chen Ping'an now carried upon his back. Fu Qi was no swordsman. Though Sword Immortal was a pseudo-celestial weapon, it was not his bonded item. This allowed Zheng Dafeng's sword-suppressing talisman to imprison the blade during their confrontation. The seal lasted only briefly, but that brief moment was enough to compel Fu Qi to surrender. Had Chen Ping'an retained the talisman, even a malicious nascent tier swordsman would have been forced to tread carefully. If the enemy were caught unprepared, a single talisman could reverse the balance of power and transform the hunted into the hunter. Yet the loss of a powerful weapon was not what weighed upon Chen Ping'an's heart. That talisman had been one of the final two jianghu had inscribed while still a noble scholar. To use it was not merely to expend a treasure, it was to watch one of the last traces of a good friend disappear from the world. Chen Ping'an could accept losing wealth, weapons, and opportunities. What he struggled to release were the objects that carried human affection. In the cultivation world, priceless treasures were often replaced. Memories were not. Compared with the intercontinental vessels Chen Ping'an had previously witnessed, the Lushuan was pitifully small. It possessed no observation deck, so the only way to view the passing scenery was through the narrow window of their room. When Pei Chan completed her transcriptions, Chen Ping'an examined every character. Any stroke written too hastily had to be rewritten. Only after the page passed his inspection did he begin practicing walking meditation with her. 4 hours, that was the minimum he demanded each day. In the past, Chen Ping'an had never considered the 6-step walking meditation especially dull or painful. He had simply repeated it again and again as naturally as breathing. Only after watching Pei Qian struggle through the same 6 steps did he understand the truth. The movements themselves were simple. Repeating them 1,000,000 times was not. A technique can be easy to learn and still almost impossible to master. The body suffers from exhaustion, but the mind suffers from monotony. Pei Qian was not fighting an enemy before her. She was fighting the part of herself that wanted to stop. Chen Ping'an watched her constantly. Before long, sweat poured down Pei Chan's face. Damp strands of hair clung to her forehead, and the color drummed her cheeks. She did not dare complain. She did not dare whine, yet the smile had vanished from her face, and with every step her thin body trembled despite her efforts to remain steady. Chen Ping'an's expression remained firm and unmoving. Inside, however, sympathy tugged relentlessly at his heart. On the first day, excitement had carried Pei Qian through the full 4 hours. When the practice finally ended, her legs could no longer support her, and Chen Ping'an carried her to the neighboring room upon his back. On the second day, excitement could no longer conceal the pain. After 2 hours, she collapsed onto the floor, completely deflated, while cramps seized her limbs again and again. For the days that followed, Chen Ping'an softened his demands. He reduced the practice to 2 hours, then increased the duration little by little, allowing her body to adapt without letting her retreat. This was the balance of a true teacher. Too little pressure would nurture laziness. Too much would break the body before the foundation could form. Chen Ping'an's sternness was not cruelty. It was restraint hiding beneath an expressionless face. Even with this concession, the training remained tormenting. At first, Pei Chan still had enough energy to glare at Julian whenever he watched from nearby and mocked her efforts. Soon, she became so exhausted that she could not even spare the strength for a glare. Only after 10 long days did Pei Qian's smile finally return. The cruelest part of the journey was behind her. Her familiar swagger resurfaced, and the light in her eyes announced that she had survived the first true trial of discipline. For Pei Qian, this small victory mattered more than it appeared. She had not gained a realm, defeated an enemy, or obtained a treasure. She had simply endured. Yet every great martial path begins with precisely that kind of victory. On that day, Julian approached Chen Ping'an with the solemn air of a martial arts grandmaster, offering serious guidance.
Young master, I can see that Pei Chan possesses exceptional martial arts aptitude. While honing the body, the more hardship one endures, the stronger the foundation one can build. I believe 4 hours of walking meditation each day would suit her very well.
Pei Chan immediately turned and glowered at him. Her strength had returned, and Julian was the first person to suffer the consequences. After finishing their walking meditation, Chen Ping'an and Pei Chan opened the window and began practicing standing meditation. Pei Chan was too short to see beyond the sill, leaving her with nothing but a wall in front of her. With Chen Ping'an's permission, she dragged a chair to the window, climbed on top of it, and stood beside him. Beyond the wooden frame stretched a magnificent ocean of white clouds, endless and serene beneath the heavens. You have to believe that your efforts will be rewarded. For the moment, Pei Chan was merely imitating the form of standing meditation. She went through the motions, but gained almost no benefit from the practice. Chen Ping'an found this deeply perplexing. He had asked Sui Yubian and the other picture scroll martial artists for their opinions, but none of them could identify the problem. Martial aptitude was never a single simple gift. Pei Chan could endure walking meditation with startling potential. Yet standing meditation yielded nothing. Her path was beginning to reveal its own strange shape, and no one aboard the ship yet understood what that shape would become. Having survived another grueling day, Pei Chan felt extremely pleased with herself. As she stared into the sea of clouds, a sudden thought filled her eyes with longing.
Will I also be able to carry a sword when I go out exploring the world in the future? I'd like a saber strapped to my waist as well, just like Little Bai. By then, I'll definitely be much stronger, so they won't feel too heavy.
Chen Ping'an looked at her and smiled before giving a quiet nod. As long as you don't slack off, I can promise you this right now. When the day comes for you to explore the world by yourself, I will give you both a sword and a saber. Pei Chan lowered her voice, suddenly embarrassed by how thoroughly she had already planned her future.
I've already thought about it. When I have my sword and saber, I'm going to strap them on the same side of my waist. I've even chosen a name for them. Do you want to hear it, Father?
Go ahead. Chen Ping'an had always believed himself quite skilled at naming things. Now he waited to hear what astonishing title Pei Chan had devised.
I'll call them Saber Sword Cross, because they'll be crossed over each other while hanging from my waist. What do you think, Father?
I think that's great. Pei Chan's face immediately lit up. She pinched her thumb and index finger together, leaving only the tiniest space between them.
I'll be very happy if my sword is even this little bit as good as yours.
Chen Ping'an turned toward her, warmth flickering in his eyes. Once we reach Azure Phoenix Nation, we'll continue on foot. When we pass a bamboo forest, I'll select some older bamboo and make you a bamboo sword and bamboo saber. You can strap them to your waist and carry them wherever you like.
Make them small and light. I don't want them to be too heavy.
Chen Ping'an smiled and nodded, then looked back toward the clouds rolling beyond the window. Then what will you do with your hiking pole?
That's my right-hand man. It has accompanied me through such a long journey, so I can't just throw it away. I'll let it retire and return to the fields to start a family. Then I'll ask Old Man Wei what official title I should grant it.
That's the correct way to handle it. The conversation sounded childish, yet it held a quiet promise. One day, Pei Chan would truly step into the martial world with weapons at her waist. Whether Saber Sword Cross remained a joke or became a name remembered across the jianghu would depend on the road she chose from this moment onward. Far behind them, in Dust's medicinal shop of Old Dragon City, Zhang Defeng prepared to leave. There was almost nothing to pack. A few sets of clothing and an old smoking pipe made up nearly everything he owned. Whether he lived in Jewel's small world or Old Dragon City, Zhang Dafeng always possessed very little. Nothing seemed important enough to bind him. At any moment, he could abandon his surroundings and depart without looking back. Such freedom might appear enviable, but there was loneliness within it. A man who could leave everything behind was also a man who had never allowed himself to possess very much. The following day, Zhang Dafeng would board one of the Fu clan's ships and travel north toward Dragon Spring Prefecture. This was his final day in Old Dragon City, and he spent it sitting beneath the old locust tree upon a simple stool. Old Man Yang had already departed, saying only that he intended to visit a friend in the invincible Divine Fist sect. Lear had returned to Old Dragon City one day earlier. Soon afterward, Fu Qi arrived at Dust Medicinal Shop with his son, Fu Donghai. Fu Qi openly declared that Fu Donghai had been the one responsible for the entire disaster. If Zhang Dafeng gave the word, Fu Qi would permit Lear to shatter his son's bridge of immortality.
Why didn't you break his bridge of immortality yourself before bringing him here? Wouldn't that have shown greater sincerity?
Fu Qi had no answer. Fu Donghai, to his credit, showed considerable courage. He did not plead for mercy. Instead, he hurled verbal provocations at Li Er, almost as though he wished to have his bridge of immortality destroyed. Zhang Dafeng remained seated in the courtyard, smoking his pipe with a tired expression. By then, he understood that the outcome had already been decided far beyond the walls of the shop. Old Man Yang had already reached agreements with the Great Li Empire, the Fu clan, and the Fan clan. When the Great Li army arrived in Old Dragon City, Fan Junmao would become the empire's second great mountain god after Weibo. The price Old Man Yang had surrendered in return was Zhang Dafeng's martial arts cultivation base. The transaction exposed the cold arithmetic of the great powers. A mountain god, an empire, and the future balance of Old Dragon City stood on one side of the scale. On the other stood the ruined cultivation of a single man. To those arranging the board, the exchange was worthwhile. To Zhang Dafeng, it was his entire martial path. Knowing resistance would change nothing, Zhang Dafeng told Fu Qi and Fu Donghai to leave. He wanted no further entanglement with either of them. Fu Qi visibly relaxed. He turned to depart with his son. Then Lear struck. His fist crashed directly into Fu Donghai's chest. The bridge of immortality was not merely broken, it was utterly obliterated. Lear turned toward Fu Qi, his expression indifferent.
I believe a father should stand up for his son.
Fu Qi lifted the unconscious Fu Donghai from the ground. Not a trace of anger appeared upon his face. Instead, he smiled.
I'm pleased that you were able to release some of your anger, Mr. Li Er. I'll return to my manor now. Farewell.
Lear smiled back, but the smile carried no warmth.
Oh? Why don't you take me along? I could pay a visit to the ancestral hall of your Fu clan.
Fu Qi's expression darkened at once. Li Er's threat was unmistakable. Destroying Fu Donghai's cultivation punished the son. Entering the Fu clan's ancestral hall would challenge the entire bloodline. One punch had settled a personal debt. One more step could have begun a clan war.
That's enough, Lear.
Zhang Dafeng's weary sigh ended the confrontation. Fu Qi departed with his unconscious son, and not long afterward, Lear also left Old Dragon City. Zhang Dafeng was left alone beneath the locust tree, basking in the warm sunlight of early spring. He wore the comfortable cotton jacket Pei Chan and the others had purchased for him. Then, the woman he had not seen for some time appeared once more. The New Year festivities had evidently treated her generously, for she had become even more rotund than before. Previously, she had only strutted back and forth in front of the shop without approaching him. This time, she gathered her courage and walked directly toward the locust tree.
Is your shop hiring, shopkeeper Zhang?
Zhang Dafeng smiled and shook his head.
I'm returning to my hometown tomorrow. It's too difficult to make a living in Old Dragon City.
The woman's appearance was imposing, but her voice was mellow and unexpectedly pleasant, Disappointment immediately entered that gentle voice.
Will you come back?
I don't think so.
Isn't this an old residence left behind by your ancestors? What will happen to the shop?
Zheng Dafeng fought back the urge to laugh.
I'll leave it as it is. It's called Dust Medicinal Shop, so why not let it gather some dust?
A faint blush appeared on the woman's face.
Why don't you give me the key? I can look after the place for you. It would be a pity to leave it completely unattended.
There's no need, but thank you for the kind offer.
Zheng Dafeng glanced toward the sky. It was still the middle of the day, yet he abruptly announced that it was getting late and that he needed to return inside to pack. With his stool in hand, he began fleeing toward the shop. The woman bit her lower lip as she watched him retreat.
You're not even going to ask for my surname, shopkeeper Zheng?
Zhang Dafeng was not shameless enough to pretend he had heard nothing. He stopped, turned around, and surrendered to the inevitable.
What is your surname?
I like eating raw ginger, so my surname is Zheng.
Her surname, Jiang, was written with the same character commonly associated with ginger. Zheng Dafeng stared at her in speechless disbelief. What answer could possibly follow such an introduction? He had long understood from the way she previously paced before the shop without approaching that she was a polite woman. She knew when not to impose herself upon another, and even now she did not press him further. She offered Zheng Dafeng a courteous curtsy.
I wish you a smooth journey, shopkeeper Zheng.
Zheng Dafeng smiled and waved farewell. It was a brief encounter, awkward and almost comical, yet its gentleness stood in sharp contrast to everything Zheng Dafeng had endured. After conspiracies, broken cultivation, and debts paid in blood, an ordinary farewell beneath a locust tree may have been the kindest thing Old Dragon City offered him. That night, far to the north of Old Dragon City, the warmth of the spring sun was gone. In a secluded place stood a newly constructed grave. Several sheets of bright red paper rested upon the mound, each weighed down by small stones, so the night wind could not carry them away. Zheng Dafeng stood silently before the grave. After burning a book, he arranged 10 small oil lamps in a row before the burial mound. The lamps contained black oil that radiated a baleful aura, yet none possessed a wick, leaving no obvious means by which they could be lit. Without warning, the yin soul of the Zhao clan materialized from the darkness. It flicked its fingers toward the lamps one after another. First one flame appeared, then a second, then a third, until all 10 burned beneath the moonless sky. Within every flame writhed a tiny humanoid figure, their faces twisted with unbearable agony, as though each one were trapped inside an invisible inferno. The 10 lamps held the 3 immortal souls and 7 mortal forms of a certain man. The Zhao clan yin soul had dragged them directly from its physical body and imprisoned them within the black oil. This was no ordinary vengeance. Death would have ended the victim's suffering in an instant. The 10 lamps prolonged punishment across every fragment of his existence, revealing how deep the hatred buried beneath this grave truly ran. Zhang Dafeng remained standing before the grave, his voice unexpectedly gentle.
I'm worried that such a harrowing sight will frighten you. I'll remain here until the lamps burn out, and only then will I leave.
The 10 human-shaped flames continued to burn. Beneath the silent heavens, Zhang Dafeng kept watch beside the grave. Elsewhere, at the Sun Clan's ancestral residence, Sun Jiashu walked alone along the riverbank beneath the night sky. The old ancestor of the Sun Clan had already reached the nascent tier, yet even an Earth Immortal could not escape remorse. For several days, regret had gnawed at him over the opportunity the clan had allowed to slip away. Sun Jiashu was far more composed. He comforted the old ancestor, saying that the clan had simply been fated to miss the opportunity. Perhaps the Sun clan had never possessed great fortune when it came to profits earned through unconventional means. Then a handsome young man appeared beside him without warning. His arrival was so sudden that neither the nascent tier ancestor nor the 3 golden core tier guest elders sensed him beforehand. Sun Jiashu recognized him immediately. This was the same wise man who had helped untangle the knot in his heart during their previous meeting. I pay my respects to Mr. Fan. Sun Jiashu had once plotted against Chen Ping'an. In doing so, he had nearly turned Chen Ping'an into an enemy and almost lost Liu Baqiao as a friend. When Sun Jiashu had been trapped in disappointment and self-doubt, this mysterious man, far older than his youthful appearance suggested, had offered him guidance.
The path you're walking has already carried you a very long way. If a stone trips you and sends you crashing to the ground, does that prove the entire path is wrong? Chen Ping'an may be walking an excellent path, but does that mean yours must be bad? If you insist on viewing everything as pure black and white, refusing to acknowledge any nuance, then you should abandon the idea of becoming a businessman. No matter how excellent another person's road may be, it is still their road. Focus on yourself. Do not spend your life measuring your steps against theirs. You may raise your head occasionally and see how others are traveling, but 1 or 2 glances are enough.
Those words had been priceless to Sun Jiashu. His greatest mistake was not that he had chosen a different path from Chen Ping'an. It was that one failure had made him question every step he had ever taken. Mr. Fan taught him that comparison could offer perspective, but surrendering one's own judgment to another person's path was a different kind of defeat. The mysterious man had revealed only that his surname was Fan. He claimed to have no connection to the Fan clan of Old Dragon City, and Sun Jiashu's instincts told him that this was true. Mr. Fan smiled as he looked across the river.
From now on, Old Dragon City will essentially have only 3 great clans remaining. The first is the Fu clan, which now belongs to Wangju. The second is the Fan clan, which essentially belongs to the old Divine Lord. As for the last, half will consist of your Sun clan, while the Ding, Fang and Hao clans will divide the remaining half among themselves. The journey north will be long and arduous. Prepare yourself mentally.
Sun Jiashu nodded without hesitation. The Sun clan will not miss an opportunity that appears only once in a blue moon. Mr. Fan's smile deepened.
Once in a blue moon? I believe you are underestimating just how enormous this opportunity truly is.
Sun Jiashu paused. As he pondered those words, his thoughts returned to the day Chen Ping'an had departed Old Dragon City. Sun Jiashu had gone secretly to see him off. Only after the ship rose into the sky did Chen Ping'an notice him among the crowd. Chen Ping'an did not pretend to look away. He cupped his fist in farewell, then raised a thumb towards Sun Jiashu. Sun Jiashu had answered with a faint smile. That quiet exchange did not erase the past, but it suggested that their roads had not become irreconcilable. In the jianghu, a fist salute and a raised thumb could sometimes carry more meaning than 1,000 formal apologies. Far away, within the imperial palace of a newly founded empire, a master and disciple walked between 2 towering walls. The disciple was a handsome young man dressed in white. As he walked, he casually traced one finger along the wall beside him. Beside him moved an exceptionally tall woman. Despite her height, she appeared neither lanky nor uncoordinated. Every step was perfectly balanced. The most astonishing thing about her was the complete absence of aura. She did not merge with heaven and earth like a chi refiner. She emitted none of the vigorous presence of a pure martial artist. In fact, she was not even breathing. A bamboo scabbard hung at her waist, yet no sword rested within it. She had acquired the plain-looking scabbard only several days earlier, intending it for the sword she was sharpening within the lightning pool of Stalactite Mountain. One of her servants had gone to considerable trouble to obtain it from Eastern Treasured Vial Continent. The white-robed young man glanced toward the scabbard. Was it purchased or was it taken by force, mistress?
I was told it was purchased.
Kalshi released a resigned sigh. Then it was purchased by force. The woman smiled faintly.
If you believe that was improper, then go and fight him.
How am I supposed to fight him? I'm only a fifth-tier martial artist right now. The woman stopped walking.
But you are the strongest fifth-tier martial artist beneath the heavens. Are you not, Chao-Chi?
Kalsi remained silent for a moment. Then he used the tip of his foot to draw two short lines across the ground, one to the left and another to the right. He pointed toward the line on the left. Among fifth-tier martial artists, this is where an ordinary martial arts prodigy stands. He pointed toward the line on the right. I stand here. Finally, he indicated a point between the two lines. The most exceptional fifth-tier martial arts prodigies of Middle-earth Divine Continent are approximately here. His mistress did not regard the statement as arrogant. If anything, she believed Cao-Chi was being overly modest. Cao-Chi was not boasting. He was measuring. True arrogance exaggerates the distance between oneself and others, but Cao-Chi's terrifying confidence came from knowing that distance with absolute clarity. Suddenly, Cao-Chi crouched down and drew a third line. It stood closer to his own mark than to the center. I believe that man stood roughly here when he was a fifth-tier martial artist. The woman looked down at the new line and nodded.
That appears accurate.
For Cao-Chi to place another fifth-tier martial artist so close to himself was an acknowledgement more valuable than praise from 10,000 grandmasters. Whoever that man was, he had already earned a position near the summit of Cao-Chi's generation. As master and disciple spoke, a procession approached from the opposite direction. At its head walked the empire's most powerful eunuch, the seal-holding eunuch, an expert who still harbored hopes of reaching the immortal tier. Behind him followed several chief eunuchs dressed in brilliant red python robes. The moment they saw Cao-Chi and his mistress, every eunuch stopped immediately. They bowed with the utmost respect and scarcely dared to breathe. Even a seal-holding eunuch aspiring to the immortal tier lowered his head before this pair. Without a single display of power, their status had already shaken the palace corridor into silence. At last, the Luchuan reached the ferry station on the border of Azure Phoenix Nation. Chen Ping'an and his entourage disembarked and entered the lively street leading away from the station. Merchants called out from crowded stalls, travelers flowed between inns and carriages, and cultivators from many regions moved through the bustling thoroughfare. Yet wherever Chen Ping'an's group walked, chi refiners and martial artists quietly moved aside. The reaction was strongest among middle five-tier cultivators and experienced martial artists of the three chi tempering tiers. The sharper their instincts, the more clearly they sensed the indescribable pressure surrounding the travelers. Most eyes were drawn towards Su Yubian, Julian, Wei Shan, and Lu Baishan. The four picture scroll martial artists moved like concealed blades, their auras enough to warn ordinary experts away. Hidden among the crowd was a golden core tier cultivator who had suppressed his own aura to appear ordinary. His perception reached deeper than that of everyone around him. To him, the combined presence of all four picture scroll martial artists still failed to equal the pressure emanating from the sword-bearing young man at their center. Chen Ping'an was clearly carrying severe internal injuries, yet even wounded, he overshadowed every companion around him. He was like a brilliant moon resting within a field of stars. The four martial artists were already powerful enough to make seasoned cultivators retreat, yet the hidden Golden Core expert recognized the true center of danger immediately. Chen Ping'an's wounds had weakened his body, not his presence. And as he stepped onto the soil of Azure Phoenix Nation, one truth became impossible to ignore. This quiet young swordsman had begun to carry the weight of someone the martial world could no longer overlook. Chen Ping'an had crossed the paths of Immortal ferry stations more than once. On the border between Watercombing Nation and Pine Stream Nation, he had even entered Green Beetle Shop and purchased something, yet most other stations had vanished behind him like roadside clouds, seen briefly, remembered faintly, and left without a single coin spent. Today was different. With no urgent destination pressing at his back, he decided to let Pei Qian and the others properly explore this bustling crossroads of cultivators, merchants, treasures, and hidden schemes. He handed each of his four subordinates one lesser heat coin and allowed them to purchase whatever caught their eyes. Immortal currency followed a daunting order of magnitude. A single snowflake coin was worth 1,000 taels of silver, while one lesser heat coin was worth 100,000. Such wealth could not buy a true immortal treasure or a formidable spirit tool, but it was more than enough to gather unusual mountain trinkets, rare curiosities, and objects carrying traces of distant sects and forgotten lands. After agreeing to reunite with Wei Shan and the others at the ferry station's most famous landmark, 2 hours later, Chen Ping'an took Pei Qian and disappeared into the flowing crowd. At established stores such as Green Beetle Shop, bargains were rare. Experienced appraisers had already examined the merchandise, measured its spiritual fluctuations, and priced away almost every hidden advantage. The treasures were safer, but they were also considerably more expensive. The true gamble lay with merchants who spread their possessions across cloth wrappers beside the road. Most were vagrant or itinerant cultivators who treated the entire world as their home, carrying unknown histories in their sleeves and uncertain fortunes beneath their feet. They purchased relics cheaply from declining clans, then spoke proudly of ancestors who had supposedly reached the Golden Core tier or even the nascent tier. Such grand claims drifted through every market like incense smoke. Seasoned buyers listened, smiled, and trusted only their own judgment. Chen Ping'an had learned much while traveling with Xianxia and Zhang Shanfeng. He also remembered the method Yao Jinji had called caged haggling. When seller and buyer were both sincere, they withdrew somewhere quiet and signaled prices secretly within their sleeves rather than speaking numbers aloud. In the cultivation world, eyesight was not merely the ability to recognize treasure, it was the ability to recognize greed, desperation, falsehood, and the killing intent concealed behind an apparently profitable exchange. Pei Qian, however, had seen little of this vast world. Every immortal painting seemed to contain another realm. Every spirit tool appeared capable of overturning mountains. Even the strange mountain spirits displayed in cages or vessels made her eyes shine with wonder. Julian often mocked her as a touty, a legendary beast of endless appetite. She did enjoy collecting all manner of oddities and would rarely reject anything offered to her. Yet when it came to spending money, the little girl guarded every copper coin as fiercely as a dragon guarded its hoard. Whenever she truly liked something, she merely stared at it a little longer. She would never open the scented sachet Lady Guy had given her on Osmanthus Island, which now served as her purse. In Pei Qian's mind, the item was already hers. She was simply allowing the shopkeeper to store it temporarily. Chen Ping'an was hardly more extravagant. After an hour of wandering in more than a dozen shops, master and disciple had not spent so much as a single copper coin. Then a wandering merchant noticed them. He was a thin, honest-looking, middle-aged man with a lame gait. Introducing himself as a man surnamed Liu, he invited them to call him Skinny Liu. The sight of Chen Ping'an, white-robed, calm-eyed, with a sword and a white scabbard across his back, made Skinny Liu believe that fortune had finally descended. He limped behind the young man for more than 700 paces, speaking without pause. His tale was polished and convincing. He claimed that his grandfather had once been a great general of Wenjing Nation. When the nation fell and its emperor died while fleeing, one of the 17 treasures from the Hall of Union, a hornless dragon imperial seal, had passed into his grandfather's hands and entered the common world. According to Skinny Liu, an esteemed immortal from Azure Phoenix Nation had already collected 16 of those 17 treasures. Only the hornless dragon imperial seal remained beyond his reach. Collectors valued completion above almost everything. Worse still, the imperial seal was rumored to contain remnants of Wenjing Nation's fallen fortune. If that rumor were true, its value could rise far beyond ordinary calculation. Skinny Liu continued following them for 2 reasons. First, this wealthy-looking young master possessed an unusually gentle temperament. He neither cursed nor drove the merchant away, but listened carefully to every word. Second, Skinny Liu was running out of time. He had barely survived the previous year. A transaction worth 3 lesser heat coins would be enough to purchase his life several times over. He had spent the new year in fear, counting the days until the end of the first month. According to the hidden rules of his profession, failure to deceive another wealthy fool before that deadline would bring punishment. Nations had laws, trades had customs, and some customs were enforced with blood. Skinny Liu was not merely chasing profit. He was struggling beneath a blade already suspended above his neck. That desperation made him pitiful, but it also made him dangerous, because a cornered man might sacrifice another person's safety to preserve his own. Thus, this third-tier chi refiner abandoned all dignity. He followed Chen Ping'an shamelessly and began introducing the ferry station itself, hoping that information, flattery, and persistence might loosen the young master's purse. This place was Wasp Tail Ferry Station, positioned along the border of Azure Phoenix Nation. Long ago it had been no more than an ordinary town. Then someone born at the very bottom of society had risen from its narrow streets. A vagrant cultivator with unyielding resolve and astonishing fated opportunities had broken through countless barriers, eventually becoming an unpolished jade-tier immortal of the upper 5 tiers. His immortal achievements spread across half the continent, and his name became a banner of hope among the vagrant and itinerant cultivators of Eastern Treasured Veal continent. His ancestral home stood at the far end of a small lane called Narrow Wasp Alley. To honor the immortal who had climbed from dust to the heavens, later generations named the station Wasp Tail Ferry Station. Yet glory always invited contention. The ferry station lay between 3 nations, and all 3 coveted Narrow Wasp Alley and the immortal's ancestral home. For centuries, the Imperial Tang clan of Azure Phoenix Nation had contested its neighbors with calligraphy brushes in court and sharpened blades on the battlefield. Countless struggles unfolded on paper and across blood-stained borders. Still, the 3 nations maintained one tacit agreement. Their conflict must never engulf the immortal ferry station. To preserve that fragile boundary, Lakeview Academy had repeatedly sent noble scholars and virtuous scholars to mediate between them. A single cultivator's legacy had transformed an obscure alley into territory worthy of centuries of dispute. In the mountains, personal strength could outlive kingdoms, reshape borders, and force emperors to bargain around the memory of one man. As they walked, Skinny Liu enthusiastically recommended the ferry station's famous well-water immortal wine, one small pot cost an entire snowflake coin, making it a favored luxury among Azure Phoenix Nation's officials and nobles who wished to display their wealth. To Skinny Lou's surprise, Chen Ping'an truly stopped at a tavern on the street corner and purchased a pot. Chen Ping'an requested 2 white bowls. After sitting down, he smiled and gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "Sit. Since you recommended the wine, you should taste it as well." Skinny Lou initially wanted to refuse and remained standing pitifully by the roadside. A miserable appearance might awaken sympathy, and sympathy might persuade the wealthy young master to buy a pile of useless trinkets. But his resolve could not defeat his thirst. In the end, he sat down. With every mouthful, Skinny Lou cursed himself inwardly. By accepting the wine, he had abandoned the most convincing part of his performance. He feared that the transaction was already doomed. Mixed emotions churned within him. At last, he decided to treat the drink as the final bowl of wine before his death. Chen Ping'an lightly clinked his bowl against the merchant's. If the imperial seal is truly so valuable, and that esteemed Immortal desperately needs it to complete the 17 treasures of Wenjing Nation, why not sell it directly to him? Skinny Lou had prepared for this question long ago. He gave a bitter smile and lowered his voice.
That elderly Earth Immortal possesses an unfathomable cultivation, but his character is difficult to trust. I fear I would never live long enough to spend whatever money he paid me.
Chen Ping'an nodded. The explanation was reasonable. Mountain Immortals cultivated countless paths, and not every Tao led toward compassion or righteousness. Had there not been a Dumao even among paramount Ascension-tier Immortals? Had Chen Ping'an not encountered Liu Jimao, the river-severing true lord of Bamboo Scroll Lake, near his own homeland? And on Sky Calling Street, those malicious Qi refiners had tried to surround and kill Chen Ping'an and Lu Tai. Had they succeeded, they might now be living extravagantly on stolen wealth, perhaps even using it to advance into the Golden Core tier. Instead, they had crossed 1,000 li only to deliver their heads, their possessions, and their unfinished ambitions into the hands of Chen Ping'an and Lu Tai. Cultivation realm and moral character were never the same measure. A person could stand near the summit of the great Tao while remaining lower than a common thief in matters of conscience. Chen Ping'an understood this lesson far too well to dismiss Skinny Lou's fear outright. Convinced that ordinary persuasion had failed, Skinny Lou set down his bowl. His eyes shifted, and his voice sank into the tone of a man revealing a forbidden secret.
I only called my grandfather a great general because the truth carries certain taboos. In reality, he was an official of Peace Square in the capital of Wenjing Nation. Peace Square was originally used to raise rare and peculiar beasts. When the imperial treasury could no longer support it, the place was abandoned and turned into a residence for eunuchs and palace maids who had committed offenses and been expelled from the palace. The final emperor of Wenjing Nation grew up there, surrounded by filth, vermin, and people discarded by the imperial court. My grandfather was always kind to him. Somehow, that hidden, illegitimate son climbed from Peace Square all the way to the Dragon Throne. Whatever mistakes he made afterward, he never forgot my grandfather and always treated him with respect. When the formidable army of Lofty Sky Nation breached the capital, the emperor fled back to Peace Square, seeking refuge. I was still young, so my memories are unclear. Somehow the imperial seal eventually came into my hands. Before my grandfather died, he ordered me to deliver it to a descendant of Wenjing Nation. He warned me never to claim the seal as my own.
Skinny Lou drank again. His eyes became unfocused, as though he were staring through the tavern walls and into a ruined capital from decades past.
I am an unfilial descendant. I have betrayed my grandfather's final wish, and I have also betrayed Wenjing Nation's crown prince, who is said to have changed his name and fled into the mountains to cultivate the Tao.
His lips trembled. Tears gathered in his eyes as the practice story reached its most powerful stroke.
Young master, please perform a good deed and purchase this precious imperial seal. With the money, I can buy wine, drown my sorrows, and finally stop facing the seal every day with unbearable guilt.
Chen Ping'an quietly filled Skinny Lou's bowl once more. His expression remained gentle, but his decision did not waver. I can treat you to wine, but I will not buy the imperial seal. Skinny Lou refused to surrender the opportunity.
Young master, will you not even look at it? You can determine whether it is real with a single glance. Even if you force the price down severely, I will have no regrets.
Chen Ping'an shook his head again. I have never possessed much luck with sudden windfalls, so I will pass. Find someone with greater fortune and sharper appraisal skills. Continuing to follow me will only waste your time. Pei Chan opened her mouth, but Chen Ping'an glanced at her. She immediately swallowed her words. Skinny Lou finished his second bowl, apologized for the disturbance, and thanked Chen Ping'an for the wine. Then he rose and limped away, his back carrying the weight of utter defeat. Only after the merchant disappeared into the crowd did Pei Chan speak.
He was quite pitiful.
Chen Ping'an took a measured sip of wine. He was indeed pitiful, but that does not mean the imperial seal was real.
You never even looked at it. How could you know? What if it really was genuine? We are not rushing anywhere.
Chen Ping'an did not dismiss her question. He answered with the patience of someone teaching more than the value of a single object. Suppose that one chance in 10,000 falls upon us and the seal is real. That would naturally be the best possible outcome. But have you considered the worst? Pei Chan frowned, searching for the answer.
The worst outcome is that the seal is fake. We fail to recognize it, and that fellow cheats us out of immortal currency.
The skinny little girl suddenly slapped the table, her face twisted with genuine pain.
That would be absolutely unforgivable.
Chen Ping'an smiled. That is hardly the worst outcome. The worst is that someone has prepared a trap and intends to force us into buying. After receiving our immortal currency, they might decide to kill us and take everything else as well. We know nothing about Skinny Lou's true character. Even if he was not born wicked, dealing with him could still be dangerous. Perhaps he owes an enormous debt. Perhaps his nature is weak, while those collecting the debt are vicious and ruthless. In that case, he would be a pitiful man whose own choices have given him a detestable quality. If we take pity on him now without considering the consequences, then when disaster reaches us, who will take pity on us? Chen Ping'an's caution was not cold-heartedness. He had simply learned that compassion without judgment could become a weapon placed in another person's hand. A good intention did not erase danger, and another man's suffering did not grant him the right to drag innocent people into the abyss. Pei Chan pondered carefully before arriving at what seemed to her a perfectly reasonable solution.
There are many of us, and we would be in the right. If matters truly became dangerous, could we not simply kill him with a few punches?
Chen Ping'an immediately flicked her forehead. If we rely only on our fists to reason with everyone beneath the heavens, then Du Mao is the clearest warning. He eventually encountered us. What happens when we encounter our own nemesis? Strength could settle a dispute, but it could not make every decision righteous. Chen Ping'an was teaching Pei Chan that the path of unchecked force always looked invincible, until it collided with a fist even harder than its own. Pei Chan covered her forehead, looking deeply wronged.
But we are good people, are we not? Old Criminal Du was evil. He deserved to be punished by the heavens and struck by lightning. After dying, he should be thrown into boiling oil, have his tongue torn out, his organs cut apart, and molten metal poured into his mouth.
Chen Ping'an stopped her increasingly wild recitation before it could continue. Where did you learn all of that? A trace of lingering fear appeared on Pei Qian's face.
During the Lantern Festival in Old Dragon City, Little Bai told me that some lanterns were meant to frighten people away from evil and encourage them to do good. I opened my eyes wide and studied them for a long time, but I felt that those punishments had little to do with me. Still, the books say that if people have made mistakes, they should correct them, and if they have not, they should guard against making them.
Pei Chan's logic remained rough and childlike. Yet a seed had already been planted. She was beginning to understand that goodness was not a title one claimed, but a path requiring constant correction, restraint, and reflection. Chen Ping'an's sword-nurturing gourd was now filled with medicinal wine, leaving no room for Wasptail Ferry Station's well-water Immortal wine. The Fan clan had also gifted him many pots of osmanthus wine, all stored inside his jade tablet minimization treasure. He already possessed enough fine wine to last an entire year. Even so, he purchased 2 pots of the local well-water Immortal wine and planned to store them beside the osmanthus wine. When he finally returned to Downtrodden Mountain, he would bury the entire collection behind the bamboo building. Every 10 years, he would unearth a single pot. Years would pass, mountains would change. Old companions might return, and new stories might begin. Beneath the soil, those sealed pots would quietly gather fragrance, memory, and time. Perhaps this was Chen Ping'an's true windfall. Not a mysterious imperial seal won through reckless gambling, but a future built patiently, one journey, one lesson, and one buried pot of wine at a time. Chen Ping'an and Pei Qian returned to Wasptail Alley, where Wei Xian and the others were already waiting. The ferry station remained crowded and noisy, its narrow streets filled with wandering cultivators, mortal merchants, and hidden currents that ordinary eyes could never perceive. Chen Ping'an had wandered through the shops without finding any treasure that truly stirred his interest. In the end, he purchased only a picture book of ancient sages for Pei Qian. The volume had been printed with extraordinary care. Every character stood upright and vigorous upon the page, as though the spirit of the sages had been pressed into the ink itself. Just as Chen Ping'an prepared to leave the ferry station, a tall and broad-shouldered young man wandered out of the alley with an empty wine pot in hand. A faint stubble shadowed his face, and a belt resembling a rusted iron chain was wrapped carelessly around his waist. Chen Ping'an's eyes narrowed for the briefest instant. Then the sharpness vanished, buried beneath his usual calm expression. That single glance was enough to reveal how much Chen Ping'an had changed. In the past, danger had always found him before he understood it. Now, he noticed the hidden weight behind an ordinary-looking object, and immediately chose restraint over curiosity. Avoiding needless conflict was not cowardice. It was the judgment of someone who had survived too many deadly encounters. He pretended not to have noticed anything and continued forward, deciding that the safest choice was to let this stranger pass. Yet the burly young man stopped the moment he saw him. Recognition flickered across his face. He pointed toward Chen Ping'an, certain that they had crossed paths before, but unable to summon the name or place from the depths of his memory. His growing confusion left no room for Chen Ping'an to slip away unnoticed. Since an exchange was now unavoidable, Chen Ping'an smiled, raised a hand in greeting, and spoke in the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. We met once outside the entrance of the small town. I was standing inside with the gatekeeper while you were beyond the gate. To recognize me after so many years, your memory is truly remarkable. The burly young man's uncertainty disappeared. His eyes brightened, and a delighted smile spread across his face.
That's right, it really is you. Aside from the gatekeeper, you were the first local I encountered there. Who could have imagined that we would meet again in this place? You've changed so much that I didn't dare trust my eyes at first. And you praise my memory, but yours is clearly better.
His gaze soon fell upon the 2 pots of well-water Immortal wine in Chen Ping'an's hands. The delight on his face immediately turned into the knowing amusement of a local who had witnessed another traveler being cheated.
You suffered a loss buying those. Authentic well-water Immortal wine must be brewed with water from the 3 oldest wells in this area. The scoundrel who sold you those pots dug more than a dozen new wells of his own. The wine may carry the same name, but its flavour lacks the true foundation. Come with me. I'll take you somewhere that sells the genuine brew. Otherwise, your journey to Wasptail Ferry Station will have been wasted.
He had taken only 1 step when he suddenly halted. A chuckle escaped him, and he looked back with an expression both amused and resigned.
No, forget it. The cultivation world is full of hidden blades. It would be better for both of us to keep some distance.
He gave Chen Ping'an the addresses of 2 trustworthy wine shops, speaking with a frankness that carried neither embarrassment nor pretense.
Visit either shop yourself if you want the authentic wine. That will spare you from wondering whether my unsolicited hospitality conceals some wicked intention, and spare me from wondering whether you're secretly guarding against me.
He cupped his fists in farewell, turned around, and strode away in search of wine elsewhere. He was a truly straightforward man. In a world where kindness often arrived wrapped around a hidden scheme, the young man's decision was unusually clean. He offered help, recognized the suspicion his offer might create, and withdrew before either side needed to test the other's intentions. Such honesty was rarer than many so-called immortal treasures. Chen Ping'an sighed inwardly, but his attention remained fixed upon the iron chain around the young man's waist. That was no common chain and no crude belt. It was unmistakably connected to the thick iron chain that had once descended into Iron Lock Well within Jewel's small world. Before Jewel's small world shattered and collapsed, Chen Ping'an had heard that the great fated opportunity hidden within Iron Lock Well had already been claimed. That tiny world had concealed far more than treasures aligned with the 5 elements. Among its innumerable legacies were 5 or 6 objects of astonishing value: the iron chain, Song Jishin's green gourd, the mandrill teapot, a radiant mirror capable of suppressing evil, and several other priceless relics. Yet among them all, the dragon-binding chain from Iron Lock Well stood above the rest. It had once been a demon-binding chain used to imprison the final true dragon beneath the heavens. Even after the passing of countless years, the weight of such an origin was beyond ordinary imagination. A treasure's true power was not measured only by the spiritual energy within it, but by what it had once been capable of restraining. A chain that had bound the last true dragon could never be judged by its rusted appearance. Its history alone was enough to make powerful cultivators risk their lives. The burly young man had already refined the dragon-binding chain into his bonded item. More astonishingly, he displayed it openly, wearing it around his waist as casually as a common belt. Either he possessed enough strength and courage to crush anyone who coveted it, or a terrifying backer stood behind him and deterred all greedy hands. There was also a third possibility, that both were true. For Chen Ping'an, this brief reunion quietly confirmed something important. The people who had entered Jewel's small world in those years had not vanished from the board. They had carried their opportunities into the greater world, and some had already grown into figures who could no longer be judged by their former appearances. Back then, the small town had been Chen Ping'an's entire world. Those outsiders were the first people to reveal how vast, cruel, and unfathomable the lands beyond its gates could be. There had been the mountain-moving ape of Sun-Scorched Mountain, Kaijinjin of Dawn Cloud Mountain, the Shu clan of Light Breeze City, and Funanhua of Old Dragon City. One peril had followed another, each more suffocating than the last. That period remained the most difficult time of Chen Ping'an's life. He had been more helpless then than when confronting the nascent Tier Flood Dragon in the Flood Dragon Trench. He had even felt more powerless than when he later stood against the Ascension Tier Du Mao in Old Dragon City. The difference did not lie in the enemy's cultivation realm. Against the Flood Dragon and Du Mao, Chen Ping'an at least understood the battlefield and knew what he was willing to sacrifice. In the small town, he had possessed neither strength nor knowledge. He had been trapped inside a game whose rules were hidden from him. That helplessness had cut deeper than any sword. Yet Lu Baishang had once spoken heartfelt words in a small courtyard. Even across a boundless wilderness of desolation, encountering a single flower could transform an entire life. Chen Ping'an had encountered such a flower. He had met a girl whose smile could make a penniless young man feel wealthier than anyone beneath the heavens. How could he not treasure her? How could he prevent his thoughts from returning to her, no matter how many mountains and rivers lay between them? That memory was more than simple affection. It was one of the lights that had survived the darkest stretch of his youth. For Chen Ping'an, cherishing someone was inseparable from remembering the road that had allowed him to meet her. The last time he drank with Fan Er, the two of them had sat upon the roof of the medicine shop in Old Dragon City. Beneath the night sky and under the influence of wine, Chen Ping'an had spoken with a rare lack of restraint. "The girl I like is the most beautiful girl in the world. But she is even more beautiful when she pretends not to know that I'm watching. She turns her face aside and sits there quietly while her eyelashes tremble just a little." Fan Er had stared at him in complete disbelief, as though the young man beside him had suddenly revealed a secret more astonishing than any immortal inheritance.
Chen Ping'an, just how much do you like her?
Chen Ping'an had already become somewhat drunk. Instead of answering, he hugged his sword-nurturing gourd and grinned like a fool who had somehow obtained the greatest treasure in the world. While Chen Ping'an followed the directions toward a shop selling authentic well-water Immortal wine, the burly young man deliberately chose another destination. He had no desire to encounter the young man from Jewel Small World a second time that day. Repeated coincidences could easily breed suspicion, even between people without malicious intentions. Before he had gone far, an old man with a completely concealed aura appeared without warning. His footsteps made no sound, and his presence blended so perfectly into the surroundings that ordinary cultivators might never have noticed him. The old man approached and quietly reported a minor matter occurring within Wasptail Ferry Station. The burly young man's expression darkened. He laughed, but anger burned beneath the sound.
Have those people lost their minds? Are they truly prepared to throw away their lives for money? Deliver a message to whoever is in charge. Tell them to stop acting like fools unless they want to become someone else's appetizer.
He nearly continued. For a moment, he wanted to use this chance to purge the rotten customs that had taken root within the ferry station. But then he remembered the harsh lives endured by vagrant cultivators and itinerant cultivators. Many walked the mountains without sects, inheritances, or stable sources of cultivation resources. Their desperation did not excuse stupidity, yet it made that stupidity easier to understand. He shook his head, the anger gradually leaving his face.
Leave the matter there. There is no need to warn them too clearly. Their fate will be determined by their own choices. But remember one thing. No one in Wasptail Ferry Station is permitted to provoke the young man I met just now.
His warning revealed that the earlier friendliness had not come from ignorance. The burly young man had sensed enough about Chen Ping'an to understand that anyone who treated him as an easy target might drag the entire ferry station into trouble. His restraint was casual, but his judgment was sharp. He then gave the old man another instruction.
Use this opportunity to settle Old Man Lu's debts in secret. Follow the rules and pay exactly the number of lesser heat coins he owes, not 1 coin more or less. Afterward, frighten him enough to make him abandon that miserable gambling habit. He already possesses sufficient wealth to live comfortably for the remainder of his life.
What should we do if Skinny Lou cannot control himself and returns to gambling?
Then the consequences will belong to him. I can save him once, but I cannot spend my life saving him from himself.
This was mercy with a boundary. The young man was willing to remove the crushing weight of one mistake, but not the responsibility of choice. To protect someone forever from consequences would not be kindness. It would merely allow their weakness to grow stronger. The old man hesitated. There was clearly another matter weighing upon him, but he was uncertain whether he should speak. The burly young man understood without needing to hear the question.
The imperial seal is genuine, but ordinary chi refiners should stay far away from it. Master once warned me never to underestimate the lingering fortune of a fallen empire. That seal carries profound fortune, but calamity is woven into it as well. The Crown Prince of Wenjing Nation's imperial Jiang clan is still cultivating in the mountains. The imperial bloodline has not been completely extinguished. The man determined to gather all 17 imperial treasures of Wenjing Nation has chosen the path of assisting the fallen imperial clan. That path may suit him, but it does not suit us. Anyone unable to restrain their greed in this matter is no different from Old Man Lu. They may even be worse. Cultivators already defy the natural order by seeking longevity. If we deliberately provoke the heavens on top of that, then we are not pursuing the Tao, we are begging for an early death.
Imperial treasures were never merely expensive artifacts. They were vessels of national fortune, ancestral karma, and unresolved destiny. To collect them was to step into the unfinished struggle of a destroyed dynasty. The reward might be enormous, but so too was the debt owed to heaven and history. The old man nodded in understanding and silently departed. This elderly subordinate, who lived quietly and concealed his true cultivation within Wasptail Ferry Station, was none other than the Golden Core Tier cultivator, who had immediately noticed Chen Ping'an's remarkable aura during their earlier encounter. A Golden Core cultivator served him in secret, yet the burly young man still behaved like an ordinary customer wandering between wine shops. This contrast offered the clearest answer to Chen Ping'an's earlier suspicion. The dragon binding chain was displayed openly because very few people in the region possessed the courage or the qualifications to seize it. The burly young man sighed repeatedly, only after purchasing a pot of wine and tasting the rich, authentic flavor of well water drawn from an ancient well did his mood finally improve. Long ago, when he was still a child, a powerful cultivator passing near the beach had noticed him. That expert declared that the boy possessed exceptional aptitude and asked his clan for permission to accept him as a disciple. His parents had agreed with joy. The elders of their own clan had previously concluded that their son was unsuitable for cultivation, so the stranger's judgment felt like heaven opening a hidden road before them. Before that day, the children of his generation had regarded him as useless. Those old enough to understand the clan's judgments mocked him most harshly, turning him into a laughingstock within the family. Fortunately, he left while still young. His elderly master brought him to Wasptail Ferry Station, where they settled inside a dilapidated residence at the far end of narrow Wasp Alley. His cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. Fated opportunities also came to him one after another, including the dragon-binding chain now wrapped around his waist. Yet he felt no desire to return home in splendor, parade his achievements before those who had mocked him, or enjoy the satisfaction of finally holding his head high. He had no longing for that lofty clan and its suffocating rules. He wished only to return in secret, visit his parents, and thank them for raising him. For him, that would be enough. Many cultivators dreamed of returning home with glory so that every former insult could be repaid. The burly young man wanted something quieter. He had already escaped the judgment of his clan. He saw no reason to chain his present life to the mockery of his childhood. There was, however, an older sister from the clan's eldest branch whom he remembered with deep gratitude. Cultivators often declared that a single drop of kindness should be repaid with a spring. The mountains echoed with that noble saying, yet very few people truly lived according to it. The burly young man was one of those rare exceptions. He had once captured a precious little creature by chance. His master had treasured it so greatly that giving it away caused the old cultivator's heart to ache. Even so, the young man insisted on presenting the creature to his older sister as a wedding gift. News of the offering sent shockwaves through the clan, leaving countless relatives unable to understand why he would surrender something so valuable. To outsiders, he had traded away a fated opportunity. To him, he had simply repaid an old kindness. The value of the creature mattered less than the clarity left behind in his heart. A cultivator burdened by unpaid gratitude might advance in realm, yet still find their Tao heart unable to move forward. To owe no money and carry no guilt within one's conscience, he believed that was a good way to live. With that thought, he raised the pot and continued drinking. The wine shop's female proprietor was an ordinary-looking mortal woman, honest in character and diligent in her work. She had inherited her family's brewing methods and guarded the old well from which the precious water was drawn. Unfortunately, she possessed little talent for business. Though her wine should have earned mountains of coins, she somehow kept the shop small year after year. The burly young man had watched her grow from a gentle older sister into a married woman. Every year she brewed and sold wine, and every year she still flushed with embarrassment and anger whenever shameless customers teased her with flirtatious words. But now the earliest wrinkles had begun to gather near the corners of her eyes. Seeing them, the burly young man felt deeply grateful that he had encountered his master. Perhaps he would still look much as he did now, even after the shopkeeper's grandchildren had grown into gray-haired elders. Wasptail Ferry Station was a gathering place for immortals, yet many mortals still lived within its boundaries. They could not escape birth, aging, sickness, and death merely because cultivators passed their doors each day. His master had repeatedly reminded him that the mortals whose hair turned white around 60 and who rarely lived beyond 70 formed the foundation supporting the small number of cultivators high in the mountains. Without those ordinary lives, cultivation itself would become a tall pagoda erected upon shifting sand, magnificent to behold, yet destined to collapse. This was one of the chapter's quietest truths. Immortals might command flying swords and pursue longevity, but their food, cities, nations, roads, and lineages were all sustained by mortals. The mountain could look down upon the human world, yet it could never truly sever itself from that world. The burly young man rarely pondered such matters for long. His temperament was too direct, and he preferred allowing cultivation to proceed naturally. He would not deliberately harm others, but if someone attempted to harm him, he would show no unnecessary mercy. Because of this uncomplicated disposition, His master had long encouraged him to choose one of the emperors of the three neighboring nations and offer that ruler his support. The choices were the Imperial Tang clan of Azure Phoenix Nation, the Imperial Yan clan of Lofty Sky Nation, and the Imperial He clan of Fortune Mountain Nation. After choosing a nation, he could assume an alias and enter its imperial court. The conflicts between officials, rulers, wealth, ambition, and responsibility would temper his Tao heart. Those worldly experiences would function like medicine applied to hidden injuries within his heart. By confronting such internal demons early, he might avoid desperation when the day finally came to advance toward the nascent tier. His master was not asking him to seek political glory. The imperial court was meant to become a cultivation ground. A straightforward man could survive blades and spells, yet still stumble when faced with loyalty, compromise, authority, and human desire. Those were tribulations no defensive treasure could block. Nevertheless, the burly young man continued postponing the choice. He could not imagine what pleasure anyone found in spending every day surrounded by rulers and officials. The emperor of Azure Phoenix Nation lived with excessive extravagance. He cared deeply about appearances and loved comparing his wealth with immortals from the mountains. The emperor of Fortune Mountain Nation possessed unusual appetites. His imperial harem included the astonishing figures called the Five Seductresses, and the atmosphere throughout his court had become thoroughly corrupt. The emperor of Lofty Sky Nation was different. His ambition burned fiercely, and he was determined to make his realm richer and more powerful. Yet that emperor was also ruthless and frighteningly calculating, more calculating, some claimed, than disciples of the school of commercialism. Rumor held that the emperor had personally written the widely circulated book titled Money, a Medicinal Herb. Within it, money was described as sweet in taste and hot in nature, both poison and medicine, capable of producing astonishing results, working miracles, and setting the entire world in motion. That single idea exposed the foundation of the school of commercialism. Wealth possessed no fixed morality. In the right hands, it could heal a nation. In the wrong hands, it could poison every heart it touched. Of the three imperial courts, Lofty Sky Nation would likely offer the harshest tempering for the burly young man's Tao heart. Its emperor understood money not merely as wealth, but as a weapon, medicine, and chain. A straightforward cultivator entering such a court would either sharpen his judgment or discover how easily honest intentions could be manipulated. The burly young man finished an entire pot before settling his bill. He then filled his wine gourd with several dozen liters of well-water Immortal wine and secured it at his waist. He also purchased 2 smaller pots of fine wine, carrying one in each hand as he strode from the shop. The proprietor showed no surprise. Everyone in Wasptail Ferry Station understood that this young man was far from ordinary, and no sensible person dared to provoke him. Yet since settling near the end of Narrow Wasp Alley as a child, he had never bullied the residents or deliberately stirred conflict. Rumors claimed that he watched over half of Narrow Wasp Alley and collected rent on behalf of another person. Those capable of owning residences there were generally wealthy cultivators or nobles and officials from the 3 neighboring nations who enjoyed displaying their status. The remaining properties belonged to local powers. These factions had watched the burly young man grow from an unknown child into the figure he was today, and their respect for him ran deep. Thus, the chance meeting in Wasptail Alley revealed far more than the identity of a former traveler from Jewel's small world. The rusted chain was a dragon-binding treasure. The careless wine drinker commanded the service of a golden core cultivator, and the young man once mocked as useless had quietly become one of the unseen pillars holding the ferry station together. And perhaps the most striking comparison was this. Both he and Chen Ping'an had once stood near the same small-town gate, unknown to the wider world. Years later, each carried a different treasure, walked a different Tao, and possessed enough hidden weight to make powerful cultivators think twice before becoming their enemy. Their brief reunion may have appeared casual, but the rivers and lakes rarely bring such people together without leaving ripples behind. The burly young man returned to Narrow Wasp Alley alone, his heavy footsteps carrying him toward the silent tail end of the lane. Halfway down the alley stood two enormous residences facing one another. Both had long been vacant, yet the colorful door gods pasted across their gates remained as vivid as newly painted figures, untouched by the passing of several hundred years. The residence on one side was guarded by two scholarly door gods. The other was watched by two martial door gods, stern-eyed and magnificently bearded. As the young man passed between them, he casually tossed out two wine pots, one from each hand. In an instant, radiant light surged from all four painted guardians. Hands reached out from the paper, caught the flying pots, and drew them through the sealed gates as though the boundary between painting and reality had never existed. A painted wine pot then appeared in the hands of one scholarly door god and one martial door god. They drank their fill before passing the pots to their companions on the neighboring gates. When the last drop was gone, the divine glow faded. The four door gods returned to stillness, becoming ordinary paintings once more. Only the damp paper around one bearded martial guardian betrayed what had happened. Even that trace quickly dried beneath the wind, leaving Narrow Wasp Alley as quiet and secretive as before. The burly young man returned to the residence where he lived by himself. It was spacious, still, and lonely, a silence that had endured for many years. His master loved wandering across the world, and often declared with absolute confidence that sooner or later he would return with a breathtakingly beautiful wife. This time, however, the old man had not departed in search of a woman who might not even have been born yet. He had gone to handle a matter of genuine importance. Somewhere in eastern treasured vile continent lay several fragments of the colored glaze, golden body left behind by a deceased upper five-tier cultivator. His master intended to seize one. Such a fragment was valuable enough to overturn fortunes. According to his master, obtaining even one piece would make him rich enough to finally search for a wife without worrying about money. Yet treasures capable of tempting upper five-tier cultivators were never claimed through luck alone. His master had even invited one of his closest friends to help, knowing that he might not be strong enough to contend with the other old monsters gathering around the prize. The greater the treasure, the sharper the test of friendship. In the cultivation world, blades were often easier to trust than human hearts, and the young man understood that perfectly. He had therefore asked whether this so-called good friend might also become tempted by the colored glaze, golden body. His master had laughed loudly. Anyone else in eastern treasured vile continent might betray him for such a treasure, he said, but not the old geezer who called himself the handsome, chivalrous young man. That man was stubborn, fierce-tempered, and notoriously difficult, yet on the path of cultivation he was widely recognized as someone who carried no guilt in his heart. He had gambled his life twice, once to stand beside a friend and once to defend the honor of his sect. Twice he had broken through to the unpolished jade tier. Twice those desperate battles had knocked him back down to the nascent tier. To climb into the unpolished jade tier once was already the dream of countless cultivators. To reach it twice, then willingly lose that height for loyalty and honor, revealed a spirit that cultivation realms alone could never measure. Even many ascension tier elites could not claim such gallantry. Even Ruanshang, Wind Snow Temple's renowned sword-forging master and a present-day military and sage, had once praised him. In his younger years, Ruanshang had likewise been famous for his uncompromising righteousness. He had declared that if the handsome, chivalrous young man ever needed a sword, he would forge one immediately and personally deliver it. The burly young man had never before heard his master speak of another person with such certainty. At last his worries settled. Yet in their place arose curiosity. What sort of old hero would carry such a strange nickname and inspire such unwavering trust? Elsewhere in Wasp Tail Ferry Station, Chen Ping'an and his companions purchased another 2 pots of well-water Immortal wine before setting out for the ferry's final attraction. Before them stood an apricot tree more than 1,000 years old, its vast crown spread across several thousand square meters, casting a sea of shade over the ground. A tremendous hollow opened at the base of its trunk. Copper coins, silver, and gold filled the cavity like offerings piled before the gate of a forgotten shrine. The wandering merchant Skinny Liu had already told Chen Ping'an many tales about this ancient tree, stories older than Fortune Mountain Nation, reaching back to the era before that kingdom rose from the ruins of Wenjing Nation. Long ago, the founding emperor of Azure Phoenix Nation had made an extraordinary exception and granted the apricot tree the title of Emperor Tree. Refusing to be outdone, the emperor of Wenjing Nation ordered his prime minister to visit in person and confer upon it a title exactly 1 rank lower, Prime Minister Tree. Then Lofty Sky Nation joined the competition. At the height of that kingdom's prosperity 300 years earlier, a meritorious general rode here, erected a monument, and composed an article in the tree's honor. From then on, the people of Lofty Sky Nation called it General Apricot Tree, Emperor Tree, Prime Minister Tree, General Apricot Tree, 3 emperors, 3 titles, and 1 ancient spirit rooted between their rival lands. The titles sounded glorious, but their contradictory origins also hinted at the tree's future dilemma. It belonged symbolically to 3 nations, yet was truly protected by none. Beneath the sprawling shade, Pei Qian took out the small scented sachet Aunt Gui had given her. The sachet had once held several verdant osmanthus leaves, and a small branch no longer than Pei Qian's finger. Golden blossoms still covered that severed branch, their fragrance undiminished and their petals untouched by decay. Those leaves and flowers now occupied an entire section of Pei Qian's wooden treasure box. The sachet itself had become her private treasury. Inside were the snowflake coins Chen Ping'an had given her for the new year, along with several copper coins she had earned through what she considered true blood, sweat, and tears. While buying spring festival goods in Old Dragon City, Pei Qian had persuaded the stunning Sui Yubian to accompany her. The moment the shopkeepers saw Sui Yubian, prices mysteriously began to fall before Pei Qian even opened her mouth to haggle. Saving 1 copper coin here and another there, she had accumulated 7 or 8 coins by the end of the shopping trip. Every last one now rested proudly inside the sachet. Chen Ping'an had warned her that the sachet was no ordinary object. Pei Qian therefore never dared to display it openly at her waist, keeping it hidden inside her sleeve instead. Now she secretly clutched it in both hands, staring up at the ancient apricot branches and wondering whether she might obtain a few of them as well. Few visitors were present. The local residents generally came only during the New Year or other festivals, offering money and praying for fortune. Most travelers passing through Wasp Tail Ferry Station were mountain merchants boarding or leaving intercontinental ships. Such people rarely trusted superstition, and they trusted unnecessary spending even less. Thus, beneath the tree, there were only Chen Ping'an's group and several bands of local children laughing as they played. Farther away, other children flew paper kites, a few of which had become trapped among the highest branches. Chen Ping'an observed the vague wisps of spiritual energy drifting around the ancient tree and prepared to leave. Then the little lotus spirit crawled out of the earth. It crept toward the enormous hollow at the base of the tree, poking its head around the entrance with undisguised curiosity. A moment later, another tiny head emerged from the mountain of coins. The newcomer climbed free, straightened its body, planted both hands on its hips, and raised its chin with proud authority. Yet the excitement shining in its eyes ruined the haughty performance completely. Its appearance was both extravagant and absurd. A miniature yellow dragon robe covered its tiny frame, while an ivory ritual baton and a rosewood saber hung from its hips. Pei Qian immediately tugged at Chen Ping'an's sleeve. Chen Ping'an considered the matter, took out a snowflake coin, and handed it to the skinny little girl. Go ahead. But remember to be polite when you speak with the little apricot immortal. Don't be disrespectful. Pei Qian dashed over at once and crouched beside the grand entrance. 15 minutes later, she returned with a spring in her step and the unmistakable expression of a merchant who believed she had secured an astonishing bargain. Chen Ping'an looked at her spoils and found himself caught between laughter and helplessness. Without saying a word, he flicked her forehead. Unexpectedly, the little lotus spirit sided with Pei Qian. It waved its arms furiously and released a stream of unintelligible sounds as though presenting an impassioned defense. Pei Qian's triumph vanished. Feeling guilty, she obediently turned around, preparing to return both the small mound of soil and the tender sapling she had purchased from the apricot tree spirit. Her heart ached. She had paid 2 entire snowflake coins for them. If the deal was reversed, she would unquestionably suffer a loss. The little lotus spirit was innocent and simple-minded, unable even to speak. The apricot tree spirit, however, was vastly more intelligent. Its command of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's official dialect was better than Pei Qian's. The two spirits had chattered for a long time in a language Pei Qian could not understand. Eventually, the lotus spirit tapped her shoe and pointed toward the snowflake coin in her hand. Thus began a peculiar round of bargaining. Pei Qian boasted that the spiritual energy in her home was countless times denser than the energy surrounding Wasptail Ferry Station. According to her, it was nearly as thick as water, and a single sip could fill one's stomach. The foolish little apricot spirit hesitated, then summoned a tiny sapling from the soil before her. It instructed Pei Qian to take the sapling home, plant it somewhere suitable, and never mistreat it. Every day she was to nurture it with spiritual energy as viscous as water. Pei Qian had slapped her chest and agreed without hesitation. Deep inside, however, she had already prepared herself to endure a great many flicks to the forehead. The bargain revealed Pei Qian's cleverness and her inexperience at the same time. She knew how to haggle, flatter, and seize an opportunity, but she still lacked Chen Ping'an's ability to see the hidden cost behind an apparently generous offer. After hearing the full story, Chen Ping'an accepted the soil and sapling, walked to the ancient tree's roots, and crouched before the hollow. The apricot tree spirit stood amid its mountain of money, watching him with extreme vigilance. Chen Ping'an questioned it patiently until the truth finally emerged. The little apricot tree spirit was approaching a breakthrough into the middle 5 tiers. Unfortunately, the surrounding spiritual energy was insufficient, or more accurately, the spirit did not dare absorb too much of it. Wasptail Ferry Station was an immortal harbor crowded with chi refiners. The ancient tree had survived and cultivated here only because of the 3 grand titles bestowed upon it through questionable political maneuvering. In truth, the imperial courts of Azure Phoenix Nation, Fortune Mountain Nation, and Lofty Sky Nation cared little about its actual welfare. The spirit also had to remain wary of the factions controlling the ferry station. For every immortal clan and mountain sect, the decline of local spiritual energy was a matter of survival. Dumao had once forcefully consumed almost all the spiritual energy inside Parasol Tree's small world. His greatest motive had been personal. He wanted to reach the Ascension tier. But success would also have brought immense benefits to Parasol Leaf Sect. Under the laws established by the etiquette sage in Majestic World, an Ascension tier breakthrough would have drawn virtue toward Parasol Leaf Sect. Its right to bear the title of sect would then have received protection from Confucian schools and academies for at least another 1,000 years. Dumao's decision was therefore not driven by greed alone. Personal ambition, the future of his lineage, and the survival of his sect were all bound together. That mixture made the risk understandable, but it did not lessen the devastation caused by failure. Had Dumao wished only to survive, he could have remained hidden within Parasol Tree's small world. Zuoyu could shatter the formation of mountains and rivers, but even he could not break the restrictions protecting that secluded realm. Yet Dumao attempted the ascent and failed. Almost overnight, the disciples who had once respected and adored him began to curse his name. Their fury sank into their souls, and they branded him an eternal sinner of Parasol Leaf Sect. To them, he was no ancestor who had rejuvenated the sect. He was the reckless destroyer who had squandered everything accumulated by generations of predecessors. Few considered his secondary intention, to ascend into the larger cage beyond and carve open a future path for Parasol Leaf Sect. Nor did the purple-robed sword cultivator serving as sect leader, or the elderly unpolished Jade-tier cultivator managing the ancestral hall's genealogical records, actively suppress or soothe the outrage sweeping through the sect. Those connected to Dumao's lineage suffered the consequences. His grandson Du Yan lost the protection of a nascent tier cultivator, and members of the Du clan were subjected to interrogation. The clan was overturned from top to bottom, its wealth was confiscated and transferred to the sect in an attempt to cover part of the catastrophic loss. People judged the matter only in black and white. They gathered at the two farthest ends of the ruler, leaving no room between worship and hatred. Such extremes were hardly unusual. When tangible benefits remained untouched, people could speak endlessly about loyalty, sacrifice, and noble intentions. Once their own cultivation resources disappeared, yesterday's saint could become today's villain. The thought settled heavily within Chen Ping'an. Should he truly establish a sect one day, he did not want his followers to regard him as a flawless paragon of virtue. And if an unexpected, insurmountable disaster eventually descended, he did not want those same people to condemn him as an irredeemable sinner. Even if everyone ultimately chose separate paths, Chen Ping'an hoped they could part without hatred. Their joyful years together deserved a proper ending rather than a final exchange of curses. This quiet wish revealed the kind of sect master Chen Ping'an might become. He did not demand eternal loyalty or blind reverence. He wanted honesty, gratitude, and enough dignity to close a chapter without destroying everything that came before it. Still crouching before the tree hollow, Chen Ping'an looked down at the tiny spirit and smiled. Haven't you discussed this with the esteemed immortals of Wasptail Ferry Station? You could become a guest elder or form an alliance with the 5 mountains of one nation. I imagine they would welcome a middle 5-tier cultivator who cannot run away. The little apricot tree spirit dropped onto the mountain of coins. Its proud expression collapsed into childish distress.
I want to do that too. Those people who stink of copper coins might trust me, but I don't trust them at all. This place is too complicated. Wasptail Ferry Station borders Azure Phoenix Nation, Fortune Mountain Nation, and Lofty Sky Nation. Several forces live here, and none of them will yield to the others. For money, they secretly smash one another's heads and send brain juice flying everywhere all the time. And if I swear an oath with the 5 mountains, which nation should I choose? The moment I select one, the other 2 might hate me enough to send someone here, cut down my main body, and chop me into firewood. My offerings are miserable, and I go hungry for 3 meals out of 4. But I can endure it. At least I'm still alive. Don't you chi refiners have a saying? It's better to live a wretched life than experience a good death. And there's another one. It's better to sacrifice someone else than to sacrifice myself.
Chen Ping'an calmly pretended not to hear the final sentence. Nevertheless, he understood the spirit's fear. Without a patron, it needed an alliance to advance. Yet Wasptail Ferry Station stood at the intersection of 3 nations and belonged fully to none of them. The spirit was trapped by balance. Choosing no faction meant slow starvation. Choosing one could invite retaliation from all the others. Its weakness had become the very reason every possible alliance was dangerous. Had a single power ruled the ferry station, the problem would have been simple. Here, however, Chen Ping'an could think of no safe path forward. The apricot tree spirit looked at him with a pitiful expression, refusing to abandon its last hope.
I heard the tanned little girl say your hometown resembles a blessed land. She said absorbing spiritual energy there is as easy as immortal drinking water. Perhaps you can help me by taking this sapling home. Once it takes root, it can help stabilize the spiritual energy of the mountains and rivers around your home. This benefits both of us, excluding those school of commercialism chi refiners who care only about money. What ordinary cultivator from the school of agrarianism or school of medicine would not consider this a blessing from the heavens? Esteemed Immortal, you must cherish this opportunity.
Chen Ping'an placed the soil and sapling on the ground. Are you about to tell me that those who reject the blessings of heaven will instead be punished? The little spirit lowered its head, scratched its cheek, and sighed in defeat.
Those 2 little ones were easy to trick, but this big one has experience in the cultivation world and is much harder to fool, just as I expected.
Planting the sapling on one of Chen Ping'an's mountains would indeed provide a small stabilizing effect. However, the benefit would be painfully limited. Most of the sapling's effort would be spent drawing spiritual energy away and transferring it back to its ancestral tree. For Chen Ping'an, it was unquestionably a losing transaction. His hometown's old locust tree had already taught him that tree spirits possessed secrets invisible to ordinary cultivators. During his journey aboard Osmanthus Island, Chen Ping'an had also discussed such matters with Ma Ji, the Fan clan's elderly sword cultivator and guest elder. He therefore knew exactly what the apricot spirit was attempting. Pei Chan saw a sapling. Chen Ping'an saw a spiritual conduit whose true loyalty would always remain with its ancestral body. That difference in perception was the distance between clever bargaining and genuine experience. Chen Ping'an returned the soil and sapling. The apricot tree spirit was intelligent enough to understand that the scheme had failed, so it gave Pei Qian back both snowflake coins. The little lotus spirit became listless. Pei Qian lowered her head in shame. Both believed they had disappointed Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an lifted the lotus spirit onto his shoulder, then reached down and took Pei Qian's hand. Why are the 2 of you feeling guilty? The apricot tree spirit is the one who should feel guilty. He corrected them without cruelty. Rather than mocking their mistake, Chen Ping'an made certain they understood that innocence and trust were not sins. The fault belonged to the one who knowingly exploited them. Inside the grand entrance beneath the ancient tree, the apricot spirit collapsed onto its pile of money and released a long yawn.
It seems I can only wait for the next fool to arrive and take the bait.
Soon it drifted into sleep. In its dream, the apricot spirit stood upon a mountain that never stopped growing. The peak climbed higher and higher until it pierced the clouds and overlooked an endless sea of white. Its ancient body became a towering divine tree. Every leaf shimmered with golden spiritual light, and every branch overflowed with spiritual essence after bathing in boundless golden incense smoke. It became the only tree spirit in all of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent to advance into the upper 5 tiers. On one of its highest branches stood 2 hazy figures silently gazing across the sea of clouds. One raised a wine pot and drank. Beside that person stood another figure with both a sword and a saber hanging from her hip. The little apricot spirit approached them in delight, even though the vision was only a dream. Such happiness should have been enough to warm its heart for several years. Yet for reasons it could not understand, tears covered its face. The dream faded. The apricot spirit lay dazed atop its mountain of coins, unable to comprehend the sorrow lingering inside its chest. It felt hollow, as though something precious had passed within reach, only to vanish before it could understand what had been lost. Perhaps the dream was not merely about reaching the upper 5 tiers. Perhaps what the lonely spirit truly desired was a mountain it could call home, companions who would stand upon its branches, and a future in which it no longer had to deceive passing strangers simply to survive.